The drawing room smelled like desperation. Not the perfume, though there was plenty of that, rose and jasmine thick enough to choke on, but the kind of desperation that clung to expensive wallpaper and aged mahogany furniture like a stain no amount of wealth could scrub away. The Vane Manor had seen better days. Better decades, really. The velvet curtains were faded where the sun hit them. The crystal chandelier had 3 bulbs burned out that no one had bothered to replace. And the family standing in a nervous line beneath it looked like they were waiting for an execution, not a marriage proposal. Before we continue, please subscribe and let us know where you are watching from. Lady Cordelia Vane stood at the center of the room, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her daughters flanked her like pieces on a chessboard, 3 of them anyway. Seraphina, the eldest, wore emerald silk that matched her calculating eyes. Isolde, the middle child, had chosen midnight blue, her smile practiced and cold. Merrick, the third, stood in pale gold, her posture perfect, her gaze demure and obedient. They were beautiful, polished, exactly what a king might want. But none of them were breathing right, because standing across from them, filling the space like a storm front, was Alpha King Alistair Thorne. He didn't sit. Kings didn't need to sit to dominate a room. He stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, the other holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His coat was black velvet, tailored to perfection, and his eyes were the color of winter, gray, sharp, and utterly unforgiving. He looked at the Vane daughters the way a jeweler might examine stones. Clinically. Without warmth. Deciding which one would serve his purpose. Lord Gregor Vane cleared his throat. The sound was small and pathetic in the silence. "Your Majesty," he began, voice trembling just slightly, "we are honored by your presence. As you know, our family has served the Ironwood Kingdom for generations. We have always been loyal. Always faithful." Alistair's gaze slid toward him. It was the kind of look that could flay skin. "Your family," Alistair said quietly, "owes the crown 300,000 in unpaid taxes. Your loyalty has been expensive." Gregor flinched. Cordelia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The daughters stood frozen, their rehearsed smiles faltering. Alistair set his glass down on the mantel with a soft clink. The sound felt final. "I didn't come here to collect a debt," he continued, voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "I came here to offer you a way out." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. Heavy. Official. The royal seal pressed into dark red wax. He placed it on the table between them. "A contract," he said simply. "I require a queen. An heir. Your family requires solvency. I will marry one of your daughters. In exchange, your debt is erased. Your title remains intact. Your bloodline continues to hold rank in my court." The words hung in the air like a blade. Seraphina's eyes gleamed. Isolde's smile sharpened. Merrick lowered her gaze, but her fingers twitched at her sides. They understood what this meant. Marriage to a king. Power. Security. A chance to escape the rot their parents had let seep into the family name. Cordelia stepped forward, her voice honey-sweet and desperate. "Your Majesty, any of my daughters would be honored to. I don't care which one." The words were brutal in their simplicity. Alistair looked at them again, Seraphina, Isolde, Merrick, and his expression didn't change. No warmth. No interest. Just cold calculation. "I don't require a fated mate," he said, each word deliberate. "I don't require love. I require a queen who can bear an heir and stand beside me without causing a scandal. That is all. You have 3 daughters of age. I will accept any of them." Seraphina opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the heavy oak doors slammed open. The sound was like a thunderclap. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. And there, framed in the doorway, was the 4th daughter, Eloan Vane. She was a disaster. Her hair, dark auburn, wild as a forest fire, was half fallen from whatever braid she'd attempted that morning. Mud streaked her boots and the hem of her plain cotton dress. Her apron was still tied around her waist, and there were stains on it. Dark stains. Blood, most likely, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. She carried a worn leather medical bag in one hand, and her other hand was braced against the doorframe as she caught her breath. She smelled like rain, like wet earth and wild sage and the faint, iron tang of antiseptic. Nothing like the perfumed daughters standing in the drawing room. For a moment, no one moved. Aloin's chest heaved as she looked up, finally realizing the room wasn't empty. Her eyes, hazel, bright and entirely too sharp, swept across her family. Her sisters, stiff and furious. Her mother, pale with horror. Her father, looking like he might faint. And then her gaze landed on Alistair. Her expression shifted. Confusion. Recognition. And then, slowly, understanding. "Oh," she said, voice rough from running. "You're here." Cordelia's voice was a strangled hiss. "Aloin, get out." But Aloin was already walking into the room, wiping her muddy hands on her apron like she didn't have a care in the world. Like there wasn't a king standing 10 feet away, watching her with an expression that was impossible to read. "Sorry," she said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. "Lost track of time. One of the rogue pups had a fever. Took longer than I thought." Seraphina's lip curled. "You smell like a sewer." Aloin shrugged. "Better than smelling like desperation." Isolde sucked in a breath. Merrick looked away, cheeks flushing. Gregor made a noise like a dying animal. But Alistair tilted his head, just slightly. His eyes narrowed. Not in anger. In curiosity. Aloin set her bag down on the side table, right next to the king's untouched whiskey. She glanced at the contract lying open on the table, scanned the first few lines, and let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, I see," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're shopping for a womb. How romantic." The room went silent. Cordelia looked like she might faint. Gregor took a step forward, hand raised as if to strike, but Alistair's gaze shifted to him, just a flicker, and Gregor froze mid-step. Aloin turned to face the king fully now. She was shorter than her sisters. Smaller. An omega, which meant she'd always been the runt of the family. The one they tried to hide. The one they pretended didn't exist. But standing there, covered in mud and blood, with her wild hair and defiant eyes, she didn't look small. She looked dangerous. "Let me guess," she said, crossing her arms. "You need an heir. You don't care who it comes from, as long as she's got the right bloodline and won't embarrass you at state dinners. You'll throw some money at my family, marry whichever sister bats her eyelashes hardest, and call it duty." Alistair said nothing. Aloin took a step closer. "You don't care if she loves you. You don't care if she's happy. You don't even care if she's willing, do you? As long as she signs the paper and spreads her." "Aloin." Cordelia's voice cracked like a whip. But Aloin didn't stop. She was staring at Alistair now, eyes blazing. "I pity the girl you pick, Your Majesty," she said softly. "I really do." The silence that followed was suffocating. And then Alistair did something no one expected. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was sharp. Predatory. The smile of a wolf who'd just spotted something interesting in the underbrush. He took a slow step toward her. Then another. Until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He breathed in. Aloin frowned. "What are you?" "You smell like antiseptic," he said quietly. "And rain. And..." He paused, his expression shifting into something unreadable. "Wild sage." Her frown deepened. So. His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "You're the only one in this room who doesn't smell like fear." Aloin blinked. Alistair turned away from her, addressing the room at large. "I've made my decision." Seraphina straightened, hope flaring in her eyes. Isolde's smile returned. Merrick clasped her hands together. Alistair looked at Gregor. I'll take the dirty one. The world stopped. Cordelia gasped. Seraphina's mouth fell open. Isolde went pale. Merrick stared at the floor, trembling. And Aloin laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. You're joking. Alistair's gaze swung back to her. I don't joke. I'm not, she shook her head, stepping back. I'm not even dressed. I'm covered in mud. I insulted you. You can't possibly. I can. His voice was final. Absolute. And I will. Send her to the palace tomorrow. He picked up the contract, folded it neatly, and tucked it back into his coat. Then he turned toward the door, his beta guards falling into step behind him. Aloin stood frozen, her mind racing, her heart pounding. Alistair paused in the doorway. He didn't look back. Don't be late, he said. And then he was gone. Aloin didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed in the smallest room of Vane Manor, the one tucked in the east wing where no one important ever walked, and stared at the wall until the shadows shifted from black to gray. Her mind was a storm, a hurricane. Every time she tried to grab hold of a single thought, it slipped through her fingers like water. The Alpha King had chosen her. Her. Not Seraphina with her practiced grace and political mind. Not Isolde with her sharp tongue and sharper ambition. Not Merrick with her obedience and soft beauty. He'd chosen the muddy, blood-stained Omega who'd insulted him to his face. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense. Around 3 a.m, her mother had tried the door. Aloin heard the handle rattle, heard Cordelia's voice on the other side, low and venomous. You will go to that palace. You will marry him. And you will not ruin this family any more than you already have. Aloin hadn't answered. She'd learned a long time ago that silence was the only weapon she had against her mother's cruelty. By dawn, the house was in chaos. Servants rushed through the halls, packing trunks and pressing dresses and whispering in frantic tones. Seraphina locked herself in her room and refused to come out. Isolde stood in the hallway with her arms crossed, watching Aloin's door like a hawk waiting for a mouse to emerge. Merrick sat in the library, crying quietly into her hands. Aloin ignored all of it. She packed her own bag. One change of clothes. Her medical supplies. A worn leather journal she'd been writing in since she was 12. And a small silver pendant her grandmother had given her before she died, the only person in this family who'd ever looked at Aloin like she was worth something. She didn't take any of the dresses her mother tried to force on her. She didn't take the jewelry or the perfumes or the silk gloves. She took what mattered. By mid-morning, a carriage arrived. Black lacquer with the royal crest embossed in gold on the door. The driver was a beta wolf with a scar across his jaw and eyes that gave away nothing. He didn't speak. Just opened the door and waited. Aloin climbed in without looking back. The ride to the Ironwood Palace took 3 hours. The landscape shifted from rolling farmland to dense forest to sprawling city streets lined with stone buildings and iron gates. And then, finally, the palace itself rose into view. It was massive. Gray stone towers that pierced the sky. Arched windows that reflected the light like 1,000 watching eyes. Gardens that stretched for acres, perfectly manicured and eerily silent. It looked more like a fortress than a home. Cold. Imposing. Built to intimidate. Aloin's stomach twisted. The carriage stopped at the main entrance. The door opened. A servant, an older woman with silver hair and a kind face, stood waiting. Miss Vane, the woman said gently. Welcome to Ironwood Palace. I'm Helena, the head housekeeper. I'll be showing you to your quarters. Aloin followed her inside. The interior was just as overwhelming as the exterior. Marble floors so polished she could see her reflection. Chandeliers dripping with crystals. Tapestries depicting ancient battles and long-dead kings. Everything was pristine. Perfect. Lifeless. Helena led her up a grand staircase, down a long corridor, and finally stopped at a set of double doors. These will be your rooms, Helena said, pushing the doors open. Eloin stepped inside and froze. The suite was enormous. A sitting area with velvet couches and a fireplace. A bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in silk. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub and golden fixtures. Windows that overlooked the gardens. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. The king has requested your presence in his study at noon, Helena said. I'll return in an hour to help you prepare. Eloin turned to face her. I don't need help. Helena's expression softened. I know, dear. But it's protocol. She left before Eloin could argue. Eloin stood alone in the center of the room, her small bag clutched in one hand, and felt the walls closing in. Noon came too quickly. Helena returned as promised, carrying a dress, simple, dark green, far less ostentatious than anything her sisters would have chosen. Eloin let her help, if only because refusing felt like it would take more energy than she had. By the time she was dressed, her hands were shaking. Helena noticed. She reached out and squeezed Eloin's hand gently. He's not as cold as he seems, she said quietly. Eloin didn't believe her. The walk to the king's study felt like a march to the gallows. Helena led her through more corridors, past more servants who stopped and stared, until they reached a heavy oak door guarded by two stone-faced betas. One of them knocked. Enter, came the voice from inside. The door opened. Eloin stepped through. The study was smaller than she'd expected. Walls lined with books. A desk covered in maps and documents. A fire crackling in the hearth. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light, was Alistair Thorne. He turned when she entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked different in the daylight. Less like a nightmare and more like a man. His hair was dark, slightly too long, falling across his forehead. His eyes, those cold, winter-gray eyes, scanned her face, searching for something. You came, he said finally. Did I have a choice? Eloin shot back. His mouth twitched. Almost a smile. No. She crossed her arms. Then let's get this over with. What do you want? Alistair walked toward his desk, picked up a piece of parchment, and held it out to her. A contract, he said. Different from the one I showed your parents. Eloin took it, her eyes scanning the lines of formal script. It was a marriage contract, but not the kind she'd expected. There were clauses, conditions, protections. The bride shall retain autonomy over her personal projects and charitable endeavors. The bride shall not be required to attend court functions she finds objectionable. The bride shall have access to royal funds for purposes she deems necessary. The marriage shall be dissolved after 1 year if both parties agree. Eloin looked up at him, confused. What is this? An offer, Alistair said simply. You think I want a prisoner? I don't. I need a queen, yes. But I need one who won't shatter under the pressure. Your sisters would have smiled and obeyed and broken within a month. You. He paused. You'll fight me. And I can work with that. Eloin stared at him. You're insane. Possibly. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. But I'm also practical. You want to protect your rogues. I can give you the resources to do that. You want freedom. I can give you that too. All I need from you is legitimacy. An heir. And someone who won't stab me in my sleep. I might, Eloin said flatly. This time, he did smile. I'll take my chances. She looked down at the contract again. Her mind raced. This wasn't what she'd expected. This wasn't the cold, transactional arrangement her mother had described. This was something else. A bargain. A trade. Something with edges she could negotiate. I have conditions, she said slowly. I assumed you would. She met his gaze. I want full amnesty for any rogue I've treated. No investigations. No arrests. I want funding for a proper medical facility, not some back alley clinic. And I want it written into law that Omegas can hold positions in the Royal Guard and the Council. Alistair raised an eyebrow. Ambitious. You said you needed someone who wouldn't break, Aloan said. That's my price. Take it or leave it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached for a pen, dipped it in ink, and began writing. Done, he said. Anything else? Aloan blinked. You're agreeing? Just like that. Why wouldn't I? He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. You're asking for things that should have been law already. If it takes a marriage contract to fix a broken system, so be it. She didn't know what to say to that. Alistair held out the pen. Your turn. Aloan hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run. To refuse. To tell him she'd rather die than be bought. But then she thought about the rogues. The sick pups. The cast-out wolves who had nowhere else to go. She thought about the laws that kept Omegas at the bottom. The system that had crushed her family and countless others. She thought about the chance, slim, fragile, but real, to change something. Slowly, she took the pen. She signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Alistair signed beside her. And, just like that, it was done. He rolled up the parchment and set it aside. You'll move into the Queen's Wing tomorrow. We'll announce the engagement at the end of the week. The wedding will be in 3 months. Aloan's heart pounded. 3 months. Unless you'd prefer 3 weeks. I'd prefer 3 years, she muttered. Alistair's smile widened. You'll survive. She glared at him. You're enjoying this. I am, he admitted. You're the first person in this palace who's looked me in the eye and told me I'm wrong. It's refreshing. Aloan didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Alistair walked past her toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing, he said, not looking at her. I know you don't trust me. I don't expect you to. But I keep my promises, Aloan. Every word in that contract is binding. I won't hurt you. And I won't let anyone else hurt you either. He opened the door and left. Aloan stood alone in the study, staring at the rolled parchment on the desk. She'd made a deal with a king. She just hoped she wouldn't regret it. The Queen's Wing was a gilded cage. Aloan moved in the next morning, her single bag looking pathetic in the hands of the 3 servants assigned to carry it. The suite was twice the size of the guest quarters, high ceilings painted with scenes of ancient wolf hunts, a balcony overlooking the rose gardens, a closet larger than her old bedroom. There was even a private library, shelves already stocked with medical texts and botanical guides. Someone had been paying attention. She hated that she noticed. The first week passed in a blur of protocol and paperwork. Helena taught her the layout of the palace, which corridors led where, which servants could be trusted, which members of the court were watching her with hungry eyes. There were fittings for wedding gowns she didn't want. Meetings with wedding planners she didn't care about. Dinners with council members who looked at her like she was a stain on the royal lineage. Alistair was rarely there. He attended the formal dinners, sitting at the head of the table with that same unreadable expression, answering questions in clipped sentences. But he didn't speak to her. Didn't look at her unless protocol demanded it. And every night, after the meal ended, he disappeared into his study or his private chambers, leaving Aloan alone with strangers who smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself this was exactly what she wanted: distance, autonomy, a transactional arrangement with no messy emotions involved. But late at night, lying in that enormous bed surrounded by silk she hadn't chosen, she felt the loneliness creep in like frost. On the 8th day, she broke. She couldn't stand another minute trapped in that wing, suffocating under the weight of expectations and expensive fabric. So she did what she always did when the walls closed in. She left. The rogue sanctuary was on the eastern edge of the city, tucked between abandoned warehouses and forgotten streets. It wasn't official. It wasn't legal. It was just a building Aloan had claimed years ago, patched together with stolen supplies and sheer stubbornness. A place where the wolves no one wanted could come for help without fear of arrest or exile. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just slipped out through the servants' entrance, pulled a cloak over her dress, and walked. By the time she reached the sanctuary, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. The door was unlocked. It always was. Inside, the space was chaos, organized chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Cots lined the walls. Makeshift shelves held bandages and herbs and jars of salves. A small fire burned in the corner, and around it sat a group of rogues, thin, scarred, wary-eyed wolves who looked up when she entered. One of them, a young woman with a burn scar covering half her face, smiled. "Eloan," she breathed. "You came back." Eloan felt something loosen in her chest. "Of course I did." She spent the next 3 hours doing what she was meant to do. She changed bandages on a rogue who'd been attacked by a rival pack. She mixed a fever-reducing tonic for a pup who couldn't stop shivering. She sat with an elderly wolf who'd been exiled for being too weak to hunt, holding his hand while he told her stories about the old days. This was real. This mattered. The palace felt like a dream, beautiful and hollow. But here, in this broken-down building with these broken-down wolves, she felt like herself again. She didn't notice the time passing. She didn't notice the shadows lengthening. She didn't notice the door opening behind her until a voice, low, familiar, edged with something she couldn't name, cut through the room. "So this is where you've been hiding." Eloan spun around. Alistair stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his velvet coat or his crown or any of the trappings of royalty. Just a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and boots that had seen better days. His hair was disheveled, like he'd been running. And his eyes, those cold, winter-gray eyes, were locked on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The room went silent. Every rogue in the sanctuary froze, their instincts screaming danger. They knew what he was. They knew what he could do. Eloan stepped forward, placing herself between Alistair and the others. "How did you find me?" she demanded. "You're not exactly subtle," Alistair said, his gaze sweeping the room. "You disappeared without a word. My guards tracked your scent. Your guards can go to hell." His mouth twitched. "I'll pass that along." Eloan crossed her arms, her heart pounding. "If you're here to drag me back." "I'm not." She blinked. "What?" Alistair stepped further into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. Non-threatening, but commanding all the same. He looked at the cots, the supplies, the huddled wolves watching him with wide, terrified eyes. "This is what you were doing," he said quietly. "That day you came to the manor, covered in mud and blood. This is where you were." Eloan lifted her chin. "Yes." "And this is what you wanted funding for." "Yes." He nodded slowly, still looking around. "How many come through here?" She hesitated. 15, maybe 20 a week. More during the winter. "And you run this alone?" "I have help sometimes," she said defensively. "But most people are too afraid to get involved. Helping rogues is technically treason." Alistair's jaw tightened. "I know." He walked toward one of the cots where the young pup lay sleeping, his small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Alistair crouched down, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong with him?" he asked. Eloan moved to stand beside him. "Pneumonia. His pack abandoned him when he got sick. Said he was too weak to be worth the resources." Alistair's hands curled into fists. For a long moment, he said nothing. Just stared at the child, something dark and terrible flickering across his face. Then he stood. "You'll have your facility," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "By the end of the month. Fully staffed. Fully supplied. And I'll have the law changed within 6 weeks. Any wolf who refuses medical aid to a sick or injured rogue will face charges." Eloan stared at him. "You, what?" "You heard me. But why?" She shook her head, confusion and suspicion warring in her chest. "You didn't have to come here. You didn't have to see this. You could have just ignored it like every other king has." Alistair turned to face her fully. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look younger, more human. My parents were killed when I was 10, he said quietly. Eloan's breath caught. There was a curse, he continued, his voice flat, emotionless. An old magic tied to our bloodline. It devoured them from the inside out. I watched them die slowly, painfully, while the court physicians stood around and did nothing because they didn't know how. And no one outside the palace cared because my parents were royalty. Untouchable. Too far removed from the real world to matter to anyone who wasn't noble-born. He took a step closer to her. I learned 2 things that day, he said. 1. Power without purpose is worthless. And 2. The wolves who suffer the most are always the ones no one's looking at. Eloan's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be. His gaze held hers. Just don't assume I'm a monster because I wear a crown. I've seen enough real monsters to know the difference. The room felt smaller suddenly. The air thicker. Eloan didn't know what to say. Every assumption she'd made about him, every wall she'd built, felt suddenly unstable. Alistair glanced back at the sleeping pup. I'll send a healer tomorrow. A good one. And I'll have construction start on the new facility by the end of the week. You don't have to. I know. He looked at her again, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression softened. Just slightly. Just enough. But you signed a contract with me, Eloan. And I keep my promises. He turned toward the door. Wait, Eloan called. He stopped. She didn't know what she wanted to say. Didn't know how to articulate the strange, uncomfortable feeling unfurling in her chest. Thank you, she said finally. Alistair glanced over his shoulder. Don't thank me yet. You're still stuck marrying me. And then he was gone. Eloan stood in the center of the sanctuary, surrounded by wolves who were slowly starting to breathe again, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. He wasn't what she'd expected, and that terrified her more than anything. The next morning, a royal healer arrived at the sanctuary, a kind-faced woman named Mira who didn't flinch at the sight of the rogues. She examined the pup, prescribed proper medicine, and left behind enough supplies to last a month. By midday, a team of builders showed up with blueprints for the new facility. By evening, a royal decree was posted in the city square, announcing the construction of the Ironwood Medical Sanctuary and the protection of all wolves seeking medical aid, regardless of rank or status. Eloan read the decree 3 times, her hands shaking. He'd kept his word. All of it. That night, there was a formal dinner at the palace. Another endless parade of courses and political small talk. Eloan sat beside Alistair, acutely aware of the space between them, the careful distance he maintained, the way he never looked at her unless absolutely necessary. But when one of the council members made a snide comment about charity cases and wasted resources, Alistair's fork paused midair. Say that again, he said softly. The councilman paled. I only meant. You meant, Alistair interrupted, his voice like ice, that wolves who aren't born into wealth don't deserve to live. Is that correct? No, Your Majesty, Then perhaps you should choose your words more carefully. Alistair set down his fork, his gaze sweeping the table. The Ironwood Medical Sanctuary will open within the month. Any member of this court who opposes it is welcome to tender their resignation. Silence. No one spoke for the rest of the meal. And when Eloan glanced at Alistair, she found him watching her. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to see the question in his eyes. Did I do enough? She didn't smile. Didn't nod. Didn't give him the satisfaction. But something inside her shifted. The walls she'd built around her heart developed the first hairline crack. And she wasn't sure if she should repair it or let it spread. 3 weeks had passed since the sanctuary visit, and Eloan was losing her mind. Not because of the wedding preparations, though those were suffocating enough. Not because of the constant scrutiny from the court, the whispered insults behind jeweled fans, or the way her future sisters-in-law looked at her like she was something they'd scraped off their shoes. No, she was losing her mind because of him. Alistair Thorne was everywhere and nowhere all at once. He kept his distance during the day, attending council meetings, reviewing military reports, handling the endless bureaucracy of running a kingdom. But at night, when she thought she was alone, she'd find evidence of him. A book on her nightstand that she'd mentioned wanting to read. A new set of surgical tools delivered to the sanctuary with a note in his handwriting, "You'll need better equipment." A blanket draped over her shoulders one evening when she'd fallen asleep in the library, and when she'd woken, the fire had been stoked and a cup of tea sat cooling on the table beside her. He never stayed. Never explained. Never asked for gratitude. He just noticed her. And it was driving her insane. Because noticing meant caring. And caring meant vulnerability. And vulnerability was a luxury Aloan had never been able to afford. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked afternoon in the royal gardens. Aloan had taken to walking there when the palace felt too small, when the walls pressed in and she needed to breathe. The gardens were massive acres of carefully cultivated paths winding through rose bushes and ancient oaks, fountains that trickled even in winter, and hidden alcoves where a person could disappear for hours. She'd found one such alcove weeks ago. A stone bench tucked beneath a willow tree, surrounded by wild moonflowers that hadn't been pruned or shaped or tamed. It was the only part of the garden that felt real. She sat there now, hood pulled up against the drizzle, her journal open on her lap. She'd been trying to write, but the words wouldn't come. Just fragmented thoughts. Scattered feelings she didn't want to name. He scares me. Not because he's cruel. Because he isn't. And I don't know what to do with that. Those are going to die if you don't replant them. Aloan's head snapped up. Alistair stood at the edge of the alcove, hands in his pockets, rain darkening his hair. He wasn't wearing his formal coat. Just a simple shirt and vest, both slightly damp. He looked normal. Human. Tired. "What are you doing here?" Aloan demanded, snapping her journal shut. "I could ask you the same thing." He nodded toward the moonflowers. "They need more sun. This spot's too shaded." "They're fine. They're dying." "Maybe they like it here anyway," Aloan shot back. Alistair's mouth twitched. "Stubborn flowers for a stubborn woman." She glared at him. "Did you follow me?" "No." He stepped further into the alcove, out of the rain. "I come here sometimes. To think. I didn't know you'd claimed it." Aloan's grip tightened on her journal. "There are 100 other places you could go." "There are." He sat down on the bench, not close, but not far either. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the rain and pine and something darker underneath. But this is the only place in the entire palace that doesn't feel like a performance. She didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence for a long moment, the rain pattering against the leaves above them. Aloan should have left. Should have stood up and walked away, maintained the distance they'd both been so careful to preserve. But she didn't. "Why do you do that?" she asked quietly. Alistair glanced at her. "Do what?" "Leave things for me. Books. Tools. Tea." She met his gaze. "Why?" He was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Because you don't ask for anything," he said finally. "Everyone else in this palace wants something from me. Power. Favor. Money. Attention. But you." He shook his head. "You signed a contract with me to save wolves I didn't even know existed. You spend your nights in a falling-apart building tending to people's society threw away. You fight me at every turn, but you've never once asked me for anything for yourself." Aloan's throat tightened. "That's not." "It is." His voice was firm. "And it makes me want to give you things. Even if you don't want them. Even if you throw them back in my face." She stared at him, her heart pounding. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Good." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'd be worried if you did." Aloan looked away, her hands trembling slightly. This was dangerous. This moment, this conversation, this feeling spreading through her chest like wildfire. The council hates me, she said, changing the subject before she could do something stupid. The council hates everyone, Alistair replied. Including me. They think I'm beneath you. They think everyone's beneath me. It's exhausting. Despite herself, Eloan's mouth twitched. Your Majesty, are you complaining? Constantly. He leaned back against the bench, tilting his head up toward the rain-heavy sky. Being king is the worst job in the kingdom. No one tells you that when you're 10 and watching your parents die and realizing you're next in line. The lightness in his tone vanished. Eloan's chest ached. You were so young. Old enough to understand what it meant. His jaw tightened. Old enough to know I'd spend the rest of my life trying to be what they were. And failing. You're not failing, Eloan said before she could stop herself. Alistair looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. You're not, she insisted. You're complicated. And infuriating. And you make decisions I don't always agree with. But you're not failing. The sanctuary proves that. The law changes prove that. You're trying to fix things that have been broken for decades. Trying, he echoed. Not succeeding. Trying is enough, Eloan said firmly. Trying is more than most kings ever do. For a moment, he just looked at her. Really looked at her. Like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. Then he did something that made her breath catch. He smiled. Not the sharp, predatory smile he wore in court. Not the cold, calculated expression he used to intimidate council members. A real smile. Soft. Almost shy. You're dangerous, Eloan Vane, he said quietly. Why? Because you make me want to be better than I am. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Eloan's heart hammered against her ribs. She should laugh it off. Make a joke. Build the walls back up before this went any further. But she couldn't move. Alistair shifted closer, just an inch, but it felt like a mile. His hand rested on the bench between them, fingers barely a breath away from hers. I know you don't trust me, he said, his voice low. And I know you didn't want this. Any of this. But I need you to know something. What? The word came out barely above a whisper. I see you. His gray eyes held hers. Not the Omega. Not the outcast. Not the debt payment. You. The woman who fights for people who can't fight for themselves. The woman who'd rather sleep in a broken building than a palace. The woman who looked a king in the eye and called him heartless. Eloan's breath hitched. I see all of you, Alistair continued. And I. A sharp crack echoed through the garden. Both of them froze. Alistair was on his feet in an instant, his entire body shifting into predator mode. His eyes scanned the trees, nostrils flaring. Stay here, he ordered. Like hell, Eloan muttered, standing. Another crack. Closer this time. And then a voice cold, smooth, laced with malice, cut through the rain. Well, well. The king and his little Omega bride. How touching. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the willow tree. Elder Silas. He was tall, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of ice and a smile that made Eloan's skin crawl. He wore the robes of the High Council, but there was something wrong about him. Something that set her wolf howling in warning. Alistair's expression went dead. You're trespassing in the royal gardens, Silas. Am I? Silas tilted his head. I was under the impression these gardens belonged to the kingdom. And as a senior member of the council, I have every right to walk them. Not this section. This is private. How convenient. Silas's gaze slid to Eloan. And how inappropriate. Alone with your betrothed in a hidden corner of the garden. What would the court say? Eloan's hands curled into fists. We weren't. It doesn't matter what you were doing, Silas interrupted smoothly. It matters what it looks like. A king who can't control himself. An Omega with ideas above her station. The council is already questioning your choice, Your Majesty. This won't help. Alistair took a step forward, his voice dropping to a growl. Careful, Silas. Or what? Silas's smile widened. You'll have me arrested for walking in a garden? For expressing concern about the kingdom's future? The other council members are already worried. They think you've lost your edge. That this girl has made you soft. Then they're welcome to challenge me, Alistair said coldly. Oh, they will. Silas's eyes glittered. Sooner than you think. He turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the wet grass. Eloan's heart raced. What was that? Alistair's jaw was tight, his hands still clenched. A warning. About what? He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Fear. About me, he said quietly. About us. About what happens when a king shows weakness. You're not weak. To them, I am. He ran a hand through his wet hair. And now they know. They know I care about you. Which means they'll use you to get to me. Eloan's blood ran cold. Alistair. Go back to the palace, he said, his voice hard. And stay away from the gardens. Stay away from anywhere isolated. Until I figure out what Silas is planning, you're not safe. What about you? I'll be fine. That's not what I asked. He looked at her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded flickering across his face. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain. Eloan stood alone beneath the willow tree, her heart pounding, the memory of his words echoing in her mind. I see you. And now, she realized with growing dread, so did everyone else. The winter solstice ball was 3 days away, and the palace had transformed into something out of a fever dream. Ice sculptures lined the corridors. Servants rushed past carrying armfuls of white roses and silver ribbons. Musicians practiced in the grand ballroom, their instruments weaving melodies that echoed through the stone halls like ghosts. And everywhere Eloan turned, someone was watching her. The seamstresses. The courtiers. The guards who followed her now, 2 of them, shadows assigned by Alistair after the garden incident. She felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage. She hadn't seen Alistair since that day. He'd locked himself away in council meetings and strategy sessions, emerging only for formal dinners where he sat at the opposite end of the table and didn't meet her eyes. The distance was deliberate. Careful. A wall rebuilt brick by brick. But Eloan could still feel the ghost of his hand on the bench beside hers. Could still hear his voice saying I see like it was a confession. It haunted her. The night before the ball, Helena appeared at her door holding a dress box tied with silver ribbon. From His Majesty, Helena said softly, setting the box on the bed. Eloan stared at it like it might bite her. I already have a dress. I know, dear. Helena's smile was knowing. But he wanted you to have this one. She left before Eloan could argue. Eloan approached the box like it was a trap. She untied the ribbon slowly, lifted the lid, and froze. Inside was a gown. Not the elaborate, suffocating creation the palace seamstresses had designed. Not silk and pearls and layers of fabric meant to turn her into something she wasn't. This was different. The dress was white, not stark, bridal white, but the soft white of moonlight on snow. The fabric was simple, elegant, cut to move rather than restrict. The bodice was embroidered with delicate silver thread and patterns that looked like frost on glass. And at the neckline, barely visible, were tiny moonflowers stitched into the design. Her breath caught. He'd remembered. Tucked into the folds of the dress was a note, written in Alistair's precise handwriting. You deserve to feel like yourself. Even at a ball full of people who don't matter. Eloan's hands trembled as she held the note. She should be angry. Should resent the presumption, the way he kept doing things without asking, kept inserting himself into her life in ways she hadn't agreed to. But all she felt was the dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. The crack in her walls widened. The winter solstice ball was a spectacle designed to intimidate. The grand ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles. Chandeliers dripped crystal that caught the light and scattered it like stars. The floor was polished marble, so smooth it reflected the dancers moving across it in sweeping waves of color and sound. And at the center of it all, on a raised dais, sat the throne where Alistair would make his entrance. Eloan stood at the edge of the ballroom in her moonlight dress, her guards flanking her, and tried not to hyperventilate. Every eye in the room was on her. The nobles whispered behind their fans. The council members watched her with cold calculation. Her sisters, gods, her sisters were here, Seraphina and Isolde dressed in jewel tones that screamed I should be wearing that crown, their smiles sharp as knives. Eloan wanted to run, but then the musicians stopped. A hush fell over the ballroom, and Alistair entered. He wore black, of course he did, but it wasn't the heavy velvet of his formal robes. This was simpler. A tailored coat that moved like water. Silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs. His hair was brushed back, revealing the sharp lines of his face, the intensity of his gray eyes. He looked like winter personified. Dangerous. Beautiful. Untouchable. He descended the steps of the dais, his gaze sweeping the room. And then it landed on her. Everything else disappeared. The crowd. The music. The whispers. All of it faded into white noise as Alistair crossed the ballroom floor, walking toward her with purpose in every step. He stopped in front of her, bowed, extended his hand. May I have this dance? His voice was low, meant only for her. Eloan's heart hammered. You don't have to. I want to. She looked at his hand, at his face, at the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the room. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The orchestra began to play. Alistair led her onto the floor, and the crowd parted like water. His hand settled at her waist, warm even through the fabric of her dress. Her hand rested on his shoulder. And then they were moving, swept into the rhythm of the waltz. You wore it, he said quietly. It's beautiful, Eloan admitted. I hate that it's beautiful. His mouth twitched. You hate that I was right. That too. They spun, the world blurring around them. For a moment, Eloan forgot where she was. Forgot the eyes watching them, the court judging them. She just felt the music, the movement, the solid warmth of Alistair's hand anchoring her. You're a good dancer, she said, surprised. I've had lessons since I could walk, Alistair replied. It's one of the few things kings are actually allowed to be good at. Dancing. Looking intimidating. Signing death warrants. That's depressing. It's honest. The music swelled, and Alistair pulled her closer. Just slightly. Just enough that she could feel his breath against her temple. I'm sorry, he said. Eloan looked up at him, confused. For what? For disappearing. For shutting you out. After the garden. His jaw tightened. Silas was right. The council is turning against me. Against us. And I thought, he paused, searching for words. I thought if I kept my distance, they wouldn't see you as a weakness. But they already do, Eloan said softly. I know. His gray eyes met hers, and the vulnerability in them stole her breath. Which is why I need to tell you something. Before this goes any further. Before I lose the courage. The music slowed. The other dancers faded into the background. What? Eloan whispered. Alistair's hand tightened on her waist. You're not just a contract to me anymore. Her heart stopped. I didn't plan this, he continued, his voice rough. I didn't want it. I told myself I just needed an heir, a queen, someone to stand beside me and make the council happy. But then you walked into that drawing room covered in mud and told me I was heartless, and something inside me shifted. Eloan couldn't breathe. I tried to ignore it, Alistair said. Tried to keep you at a distance. But every time I see you fighting for those rogues, every time you challenge me or look at me like I'm just a man instead of a crown, he shook his head. I can't pretend anymore, Eloan. You're not just my betrothed. You're not just a political arrangement. You're... Don't, Eloan interrupted, her voice breaking. Don't say it. Why not? Because I don't know what to do with it. Her eyes burned. Because I've spent my whole life being invisible. Being the daughter no one wanted, the Omega no one noticed. And now you're standing here telling me you see me, and I don't know if I can trust it. I don't know if I can trust you. Alistair stopped dancing. Right there in the middle of the ballroom, with everyone watching, he stopped. Then don't trust me, he said fiercely. Trust yourself. Trust what you feel. I don't feel anything, Aloan lied. Liar. And then he did something that made the entire ballroom gasp. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Slowly. Deliberately. A gesture meant for private moments, not public displays. You feel it too, he said against her skin. I know you do. Aloan's hands shook. Her walls were crumbling, the careful distance she'd maintained splintering like glass. This is a mistake, she whispered. Probably. Alistair's smile was sad. But I don't care anymore. The music ended. The ballroom erupted into polite applause, but it sounded distant. Muffled. Alistair stepped back, releasing her hand. I won't push you. I won't demand anything you're not ready to give. But I need you to know. He took a breath. You're not alone in this. Whatever you're feeling. Whatever this is. I'm feeling it too. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by whispers and stares and the wreckage of every wall she'd ever built. Aloan didn't remember leaving the ballroom. She found herself in the gardens, their alcove rain-soaked and gasping for air. Her dress was muddy at the hem, her hair falling loose from its pins. She sank onto the bench and buried her face in her hands. She was terrified. Terrified because he was right. She did feel it. The pull. The connection. The way her heart raced when he looked at her. The way her skin burned where he'd touched her. She was falling for him. And that was the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind her. I thought I'd find you here. Aloan didn't turn around. Go away, Alistair. No. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. You can't just, Aloan's voice cracked. You can't just say things like that in front of everyone. You can't make me feel things I'm not supposed to feel. Why not? Because you're a king. She finally looked at him, tears streaking her cheeks. And I'm nobody. An omega. An outcast. The girl your council thinks is beneath you. The girl who doesn't belong in your world. Alistair reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. You belong wherever you choose to be. That's not how the world works. Then maybe the world is wrong. Aloan laughed bitterly. You can't just change the world because you want to. Watch me. The conviction in his voice made her breath hitch. Alistair cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I know you're scared. I know you don't trust this. But I'm not going anywhere alone. And I'm not going to stop fighting for you. For us. Even if you push me away. Even if you run. Why? She whispered. Because you're the first person who's ever made me feel like I'm more than just a crown, he said simply. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it's like to be human. And I can't lose that. I won't. Aloan's heart shattered and mended all at once. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. I'm terrified. Me too. What if we can't make this work? Then we'll fail together. His hands tightened on her face. But at least we'll try. For a long moment, they just breathed. Two broken people holding on to each other in the rain. And then Aloan closed the distance. The kiss was soft. Tentative. A question and an answer all at once. Alistair made a sound low in his throat, his hands sliding into her hair, and the kiss deepened. Became something desperate. Something real. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. I don't know how to do this, Aloan admitted. Neither do I, Alistair said. But we'll figure it out. She laughed, the sound watery. You're insufferable. You love it. I hate that you're right. He smiled, that real smile, the one that made him look young and hopeful and entirely too human. Stay with me, he said quietly. Not because of the contract. Not because of duty. Just stay. Aloan looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the king. The man. The boy who'd lost his parents too young. The wolf who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. And she saw herself reflected in his eyes. Seen. Valued. Loved. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll stay. Alistair pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her like he could shield her from the world. And for the first time in her life, Eloin let herself be held. The rain fell around them, soft and steady, washing away the last of her defenses. She'd made her choice. Now she just had to survive it. The days after the ball felt like living in a dream. Not the suffocating kind that squeezed the air from your lungs, but the kind that made you forget why you'd ever been afraid in the first place. Alistair didn't announce what had happened between them. Didn't parade her around or make grand declarations. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He made time for her. Mornings became theirs. Before the council meetings and the endless parade of responsibilities, before the palace woke and the performance began, he would find her. Sometimes in the gardens, sometimes in the library, sometimes in the sanctuary where she still spent her evenings tending to the rogues who needed her. He never came empty-handed. One morning, he brought coffee, real coffee, not the watered-down palace version, and sat with her while she changed bandages on a young rogue who'd been caught in a trap. He didn't speak. Just watched her work with those gray eyes that saw too much. You're staring, Eloin said without looking up. I'm observing, Alistair corrected. That's creepy. You have blood on your cheek. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, smearing it worse. Alistair's mouth twitched. Here. He pulled out a handkerchief, monogrammed, because of course it was, and reached across to clean her face himself. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpectedly tender, that Eloin forgot how to breathe. There, he said softly, pulling back. Better. The young rogue on the cot watched them with wide eyes. Are you two together? Eloin opened her mouth to deny it. Alistair spoke first. Yes. Her heart stumbled. The rogue grinned. Good. She deserves someone who looks at her like that. Like what? Eloin asked. Like she hung the moon, the rogue said simply. After they left the sanctuary, walking side by side through the empty morning streets, Eloin finally found her voice. You didn't have to say that, she said quietly. About us being together. Would you have preferred I lied? I don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself. It just makes it real. Alistair stopped walking. Turned to face her. Is that a bad thing? I don't know that either. He studied her for a long moment, then reached out and took her hand. His thumb traced slow circles over her knuckles. I'm not good at this, he admitted. Relationships. Vulnerability. Letting people in. I've spent my entire life keeping everyone at arm's length because that's what kings do. We don't get to be human. We don't get to want things for ourselves. Then why are you trying? Eloin asked. His gray eyes met hers. Because you make me want to be selfish. The words settled between them, heavy and true. Eloin squeezed his hand. I'm not good at this either. Then we'll be terrible at it together. She laughed despite herself. That's not reassuring. It's honest. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles the way he had at the ball. And I think we've both had enough of pretty lies. The afternoons were stolen moments. Alistair would escape his council meetings, slipping out through side doors while his advisors argued over trade routes and tax policies, and find her in the library or the gardens or the small sitting room she'd claimed as her own. One afternoon, he found her curled up in a window seat, reading a medical text that looked older than the palace itself. Riveting literature? He asked, settling into the seat across from her. Eloin glanced up. It's about bloodline curses. Hereditary magic that corrupts from the inside out. His expression shifted. Went still. I'm trying to understand what happened to your parents, she said softly. I thought, maybe if I learned more about it, I could help. Find a way to make sure it doesn't happen to you. Alistair said nothing for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Slow. Reverent. No one's ever tried to save me before, he whispered against her skin. Eloan's throat tightened. Then they were idiots. He pulled back, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest ache. Gratitude. Wonder. Something that looked dangerously close to love. The curse died with them, he said quietly. The court mages made sure of it before I took the throne. But the fact that you're trying. He shook his head. You're remarkable, Eloan Vane. I'm really not. You are. His hand found hers. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. The evenings belonged to the garden. Their garden. The alcove with the willow tree and the dying moonflowers Alistair refused to give up on. He'd started replanting them. Eloan found him there one evening, sleeves rolled up, dirt under his fingernails, carefully transferring seedlings to a sunnier patch of soil. You're actually doing it, she said, surprised. He glanced up. You doubted me? A little. Harsh. But he was smiling. That real smile that still caught her off guard every time. Eloan sat down beside him, picking up a small trowel. Show me how. So he did. They worked side by side as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Alistair's hands covered hers, guiding her movements, teaching her how to pack the soil just right, how to give the roots room to breathe. Why moonflowers? She asked. They bloom at night, Alistair said. When everything else is sleeping. When the world's quietest. I've always liked that. The idea that something beautiful can exist in the darkness. Eloan looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the boy who'd grown up alone, who'd learned to wear coldness like armor, who'd built walls so high no one could scale them. Until her. You're not as cold as you pretend to be, she said softly. Neither are you. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They sat like that as the stars came out, one by one, scattered across the darkening sky. I have something to tell you, Alistair said eventually. Eloan tensed. What? The new medical facility is finished. It opens next week. I thought, maybe you'd want to name it. Her breath caught. Really? It's yours, Eloan. You built it. Not with money or power, but with your hands and your heart. It should carry your name. Your legacy. Tears pricked her eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Just, let me give you this. Let me give you everything you deserve. Eloan turned in his arms, cupping his face in her dirt-stained hands. You already have. And then she kissed him. Not the tentative, questioning kiss from the rain-soaked alcove. This was different. Deeper. A promise wrapped in hope and fear and something that felt dangerously close to forever. When they broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Alistair rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling for you, he whispered. I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated and dangerous and probably the worst decision I've ever made. But I can't stop. Eloan's heart cracked open. I'm falling too. Yeah. She laughed, the sound watery. You're annoying and overbearing and you do things without asking, but you're also, her voice broke. You're also the first person who's ever made me feel like I matter. You do matter, Alistair said fiercely. More than you know. They stayed in the garden until the moon rose, wrapped around each other like they could hold back the world through sheer force of will. Neither of them noticed the shadow watching from the trees. Neither of them saw Elder Silas standing in the darkness, his smile cold and calculating as he turned and walked away. The next morning, everything changed. Eloan woke to pounding on her door. Harsh. Urgent. Terrifying. She stumbled out of bed, still in her nightgown, and yanked the door open. Helena stood there, pale as death. You need to come with me. Now. What's wrong? The council has called an emergency session. They're accusing you, Helena's voice broke. They're accusing you of treason. The world tilted. What? They found evidence in your rooms, Helena said, tears streaming down her face. Stolen documents. Royal secrets. Communications with rogue leaders. They're saying you've been spying for the rebellion. Eloan's blood turned to ice. That's insane. I would never. I know, dear. I know. Helena grabbed her hands. But they have proof. And the king has been summoned. He has to preside over the trial. Trial? Eloan's voice came out as a whisper. Helena, I didn't do this. Someone's framing me. I believe you. But the council, Helena shook her head. They want you executed, Eloan. And by law, if the evidence is real, the king has to comply. The room spun. Executed. They wanted her dead. And Alistair, gods, Alistair would have to be the one to order it. I need to see him, Eloan said desperately. I need to explain. You can't. They've already taken him into the council chamber. You're to remain here under guard until the trial begins. As if summoned by her words, 2 palace guards appeared in the doorway. Not her usual shadows. These were different. Harder. Their expressions cold. Miss Vane, one of them said. You're under arrest. Eloan's knees nearly gave out. Helena squeezed her hands one last time. Fight, dear. Don't let them break you. Then the guards were pulling her away, leading her down corridors she'd walked 1,000 times, past servants who wouldn't meet her eyes and courtiers who whispered behind their hands. She was marched to a small antechamber near the council room and locked inside. Alone. Through the walls, she could hear voices. Angry. Accusatory. And one voice cutting through them all, cold and deadly. Alistair. Show me the evidence. Papers rustled. Murmurs of agreement. And then silence. Eloan pressed her ear against the door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. This is your signature, is it not? That was Silas. Smooth. Victorious. On this letter to the rogue leader, Cale the Bloodied. Offering him royal secrets in exchange for sanctuary. That's not my, Eloan heard her own voice, distant, desperate. No. Wait. That wasn't her voice in the council room. That was her voice in her head, screaming denials that no one would hear. More silence. Then Alistair spoke. His voice was different. Empty. Hollow. Where was this found? In her personal chambers, Your Majesty. Hidden in a false panel behind her wardrobe. And the royal jewels? Also recovered from her rooms. Eloan's blood ran cold. Jewels? What jewels? Your Majesty, Silas continued, I understand this is difficult. You've grown attached to the girl. But the law is clear. Treason is punishable by death. And as king, you must uphold that law. Even when it hurts. Eloan's hands pressed against the door, tears streaming down her face. He wouldn't believe it. He couldn't. He knew her. He'd held her. He'd told her he was falling for her. He knew she wasn't a traitor. The silence stretched on for an eternity. And then Alistair spoke. Lock her in the tower, he said, his voice dead. Until I decide what to do with her. Eloan's world shattered. The tower was exactly what Eloan expected a prison to be. Cold. Dark. Suffocating. A single room at the top of the north tower, with stone walls that wept moisture and a narrow window too high to reach. A cot that smelled like mildew. A bucket in the corner. No fire. No light except what filtered through the iron-barred window during the day. They'd stripped her of everything. Her clothes, her medical bag, even the silver pendant her grandmother had given her. They'd dressed her in rough canvas, a prisoner's garb, and chained her wrist to a bolt in the wall. Not tight enough to hurt, but tight enough to remind her. She was trapped. And the man she'd started to love had put her here. Eloan sat on the cot, knees drawn to her chest, and tried to understand what had happened. The evidence was fake. It had to be. She'd never written letters to rogue leaders. Never stolen royal jewels. Never betrayed anyone. But someone had made it look like she had. Silas. It had to be Silas. The way he'd smiled in the garden. The way he'd appeared at exactly the wrong moment. The way he'd been so eager to present the evidence, his voice dripping with false concern. He'd orchestrated this. All of it. But why? The answer came to her slowly, piece by piece, like a puzzle assembling itself in the darkness. Silas wanted Alistair gone. Wanted the throne for himself or for someone he could control. And the fastest way to destroy a king wasn't to kill him, it was to break him. To strip away everything that made him human. To force him to choose between his duty and his heart. And Eloin was the perfect weapon. She laughed bitterly. Of course she was. The outcast Omega. The girl no one wanted. Easy to frame. Easy to dispose of. And when Alistair executed her, because that's what kings did to traitors, it would destroy him. Would turn him into the cold, heartless monster the council wanted. Or drive him to madness. Either way, Silas won. Footsteps echoed on the stone stairs. Eloin's head snapped up, her heart racing. The door opened. But it wasn't a guard. It wasn't Helena. It was Alistair. He stood in the doorway, backlit by torchlight, his face cast in shadow. He'd changed since the council meeting. His formal robes were gone, replaced by simple dark clothing. His hair was disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. And his eyes were empty. Get out, Eloin said, her voice raw. He stepped inside. Closed the door behind him. I said get out. She stood, the chain rattling. You have no right to be here. I have every right, Alistair said quietly. I'm the king. Then act like one. Eloin's voice cracked. Execute me. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Isn't that what the law demands? Alistair flinched. That's what I thought, she continued, bitterness flooding her words. You stood there in that council chamber and listened to them accuse me of treason. You looked at fabricated evidence and her voice broke. You believed them. I didn't. You locked me in a tower. Tears streamed down her face. You told me you saw me. You told me I mattered. You told me you were falling for me. And then the moment things got difficult, the moment your precious counsel put pressure on you, you threw me away like I was nothing. That's not what happened, Alistair said, his voice strained. Then what did happen? Eloin demanded. Explain it to me, Your Majesty. Make me understand why the man who kissed me in the garden last night is the same man who imprisoned me this morning. Alistair's jaw clenched. I was buying time. What? The council wanted you arrested immediately, he said, each word forced. They wanted you in chains in front of the entire court. A public trial. A public execution. Silas was already calling for your head. Eloin's breath caught. I couldn't stop them, Alistair continued. Not without evidence. Not without proof that you'd been framed. So I did the only thing I could. I took control of the situation. I ordered you locked in the tower, away from the council's reach, while I investigate. Investigate? Eloin's laugh was hollow. You think I'm guilty. I know you're not. His voice was fierce now, the emptiness cracking. I know you, Eloin. I know you'd never betray this kingdom. But knowing isn't enough. I need proof. I need to find who actually planted that evidence before the council forces my hand. Eloin stared at him, torn between hope and fury. And if you don't find it? Alistair's expression shattered. Then I'll have to choose between you and the crown. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. What choice is that? Eloin whispered. You're a king. You'll choose the crown. You have to. I won't. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees in front of her. I won't lose you. I don't care what it costs. You're lying. I'm not. He grabbed her free hand, pressing it against his chest. His heart was racing. Feel that? That's terror, Eloin. Pure terror. Because I finally found something that matters more than duty, more than legacy, more than the God's damned crown. And now I might lose it. Eloin's defenses crumbled. Alistair. I love you, he said desperately. I know it's too soon. I know you probably don't believe me. But I love you. And I will burn this kingdom to the ground before I let them take you from me. The tears came harder now, hot and uncontrollable. You can't say things like that, she sobbed. You can't make promises you can't keep. Then watch me keep them. He stood, pulling a key from his pocket. I'm getting you out of here. Aloan's eyes widened. What? Tonight. Now. He unlocked the chain around her wrist. There's a passage behind the north wall. It leads out of the palace, into the forest. You'll take it. Run to the neutral territories. I'll send word when it's safe. You're insane, Aloan breathed. If they find out you helped me escape, they'll call it treason, Alistair finished. They'll strip my title. Possibly execute me. I know. Then why? Because I love you more than I love being king. He cupped her face, his gray eyes blazing. And I'd rather die knowing you're alive somewhere than spend the rest of my life sitting on a throne covered in your blood. Aloan's heart broke and healed simultaneously. She grabbed his shirt, pulled him down, and kissed him hard. Desperately. Like she could pour every unsaid word, every unspoken feeling into that single moment. When they broke apart, both of them were shaking. I love you too, she whispered. I should have said it sooner. Should have told you when we had time. But I love you, Alistair Thorne. And I'm terrified of what that means. Me too. He pressed his forehead against hers. But we don't have time for fear. You need to go. Now. He led her to the north wall, pressing on a specific stone. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. Follow it down, Alistair said. It'll take you to the forest. There's a safe house 3 miles north, an old hunting cabin. Wait there. I'll come for you as soon as I can. Aloan grabbed his hand. What about you? I'll be fine. You're a terrible liar. His smile was sad. I learned from the best. A sound echoed from below, footsteps on the stairs. Guards coming to check on the prisoner. Go, Alistair urged. Now. But Aloan couldn't move. Couldn't leave him. Because suddenly she understood. This was goodbye. If she ran, she'd be marked as a traitor for real. And Alistair, he'd be ruined for helping her. They'd hunt her. Hunt him. And even if they survived, even if they both made it out alive, they'd never be able to come back. Everything they'd built, the sanctuary, the laws, the hope, would be destroyed. I can't, she whispered. Aloan. I can't run. She stepped back from the passage. If I run, Silas wins. He gets what he wants, you broken, me gone, the kingdom in chaos. I won't give him that. You'll die, Alistair said desperately. Maybe. She lifted her chin. Or maybe I'll fight. Maybe I'll stand in front of that council and force them to look at me. Force them to see what they're doing. They won't care. Then I'll make them care. Her voice was steel. I'm not a helpless Omega, Alistair. I'm not a pawn. And I'm done letting people treat me like I am. The footsteps grew louder. Alistair grabbed her shoulders. Please. Don't do this. Don't throw your life away. I'm not throwing it away, Aloan said fiercely. I'm taking it back. And if I'm going to die, I'm going to die on my terms. Not running. Not hiding. Standing. The door burst open. 3 guards flooded in, weapons drawn. Alistair stepped in front of Aloan instinctively, shielding her. Your Majesty, the lead guard said, confused. What are you doing here? Ensuring the prisoner was secure, Alistair said coldly, slipping back into his king's mask. Is there a problem? The council has ordered an immediate trial, sire. Tomorrow at dawn. They're demanding. I heard what they're demanding, Alistair interrupted. And I will address the council in the morning. Until then, the prisoner remains here. Understood. The guard hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. They left. Alistair turned back to Aloan, his mask cracking. Tomorrow. I know. She touched his cheek. Whatever happens, I need you to know I don't regret any of it. The contract. The garden. The moonflowers. You. I don't regret you. Alistair's eyes burned. Aloan. Go, she said softly. You have a kingdom to save. And I have a trial to prepare for. He kissed her once more. Slow, gentle, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. Then he turned and left, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the stone chamber. Eloan stood alone in her prison, chin held high and prepared for war. She'd spent her whole life being underestimated. Tomorrow, she'd show them exactly how dangerous an Omega could be. Dawn came like a blade. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. Eloan hadn't slept. She'd spent the night pacing her cell, her mind racing through everything she knew, everything she could prove, every piece of evidence that might save her life. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. When the guards came for her, she was ready. She'd washed her face in the bucket of stale water they'd left her, braided her hair back with steady hands. And when they led her down the tower stairs in chains, she walked with her spine straight and her chin high. She would not cower. The council chamber was packed. Every noble in the kingdom seemed to have crawled out of their estates to witness this. They lined the walls, perched in the gallery, whispered behind jeweled hands. Eloan recognized faces from the ball, from dinners, from corridors where they'd looked through her like she was invisible. Now they stared. At the front of the chamber sat the High Council, 7 wolves in ceremonial robes, their expressions ranging from barely concealed disgust to cold calculation. And in the center, in the high-backed chair reserved for the king, sat Alistair. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His jaw was tight. And when his gaze met hers across the chamber, she saw the war raging behind his winter-gray eyes. Duty versus love. Law versus heart. The king versus the man. Eloan was led to the center of the floor, a raised platform where the accused stood for judgment. Her chains were locked to an iron ring, forcing her to remain standing. Elder Silas rose from his seat, and the chamber fell silent. Eloan Vane, he began, his voice carrying through the space like poison. You stand accused of high treason against the Ironwood Kingdom, of conspiring with rogue elements to undermine the crown, of stealing royal secrets and royal property. How do you plead? Eloan met his gaze without flinching. Not guilty. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Silas smiled. The evidence suggests otherwise. He gestured, and a servant brought forth a wooden box. From it, Silas pulled documents, letters supposedly written in Eloan's hand, detailing pack movements and guard rotations. Royal jewels, a necklace and ring bearing the thorn crest, and a small leather journal that made Eloan's blood run cold. Her journal. The one she'd kept since she was 12. The one that contained her private thoughts, her fears, her dreams. The one she'd left in her room at the palace. These were found hidden in the accused chambers, Silas continued. Letters to known traitors. Stolen property. And this, he held up the journal. A detailed account of her activities, including her work with rogues and her plans to destabilize the kingdom from within. That's not what that is, Eloan said, her voice sharp. That's my personal journal. It has nothing to do with. Shall I read from it? Silas interrupted smoothly. Perhaps the entry from 3 weeks ago? The one where you write, and I quote, I hate this place. I hate these people. I hate everything about this kingdom and the wolves who run it. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Eloan's heart sank. She had written that on a particularly dark night when the council had mocked her at dinner and her mother had sent a letter calling her a disgrace. But it had been a moment of frustration, not a declaration of treason. Context matters, she said desperately. Those words were written in anger, not anger that led to action, Silas cut in. You despise this kingdom. So you sought to destroy it. That's not true. Then explain the letters, Silas said coldly. Explain the jewels. Explain how royal secrets ended up in the hands of rogue leaders. I can't, Eloan admitted, her voice breaking. Because I didn't write those letters. I didn't steal those jewels. Someone planted them in my room to frame me. Convenient, Silas said. And who, pray tell, would go through such elaborate lengths to frame a simple omega? You, Aloan said. The chamber erupted. Silas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise. And then calculation. Bold, he said quietly. Accusing a senior member of the High Council of treason. Do you have proof? Not yet, Aloan said. But I will. Because I know you did this. I know you want the king destroyed. You want him to either execute me and lose his humanity, or refuse and lose his crown. Either way, you win. Silas's smile widened. Paranoid delusions from a desperate girl. Are they? Aloan turned to address the chamber. Look at this. Really look at it. I'm an Omega. I have no power, no connections, no reason to betray anyone. But I do have something that threatens men like Elder Silas. And what is that? Someone called from the gallery. I have the king's heart, Aloan said simply. The chamber went silent. She looked at Alistair then. Really looked at him. Saw the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair. The way his knuckles had gone white. The way he was holding himself together by sheer force of will. I didn't plan it, she continued, her voice softer now. Didn't want it. I came here expecting a cold transaction. A political marriage. Nothing more. But then I saw him. Not the king. The man. The wolf who visits sick rogues in secret. Who plants moonflowers because they bloom in darkness. Who carries the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders and still finds time to be kind. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. I fell in love with him, she said. And that terrifies certain people. Because a king with a heart is harder to control than a king with nothing to lose. Silas's expression darkened. This is... I'm not finished, Aloan said, her voice rising. You want to know why I work with rogues? Why I spend my nights in a falling-apart building instead of a palace? Because those wolves are the ones your laws abandoned. The ones your system discarded. They're the proof that something is broken in this kingdom. And instead of fixing it, you'd rather execute anyone who points it out. She turned back to the council. So go ahead, she said, spreading her chained arms. Execute me. Call it justice. Call it law. But know that you're not killing a traitor. You're killing the first person who dared to tell you the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. And then Alistair stood. Every eye in the chamber swung to him. He descended from his chair slowly, deliberately, crossing the floor until he stood directly in front of Aloan. Close enough that she could see the storm in his gray eyes. Close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from him. Your Majesty, Silas warned. You cannot. I can, Alistair interrupted, his voice cold as winter. I am the king. And I will speak. He turned to address the chamber, but his hand found Aloan's. Squeezed once. A promise. I have listened to the evidence, Alistair said. I have reviewed the documents. And I have come to a conclusion. Aloan's heart hammered. This trial, Alistair continued, is a farce. Chaos erupted. Your Majesty. Silas's voice cut through the noise. You cannot ignore the evidence. I'm not ignoring it, Alistair said coldly. I'm questioning it. Because convenient evidence that appears at the exact moment it's needed is not evidence. It's manipulation. He pulled a document from his coat. Last night, I conducted my own investigation. I spoke to the guards who supposedly found the stolen items. I examined the letters supposedly written by Aloan. And I discovered something interesting. He held up the document. The handwriting is close. But it's not exact. The ink is wrong, imported from the Eastern Territories, not the kind used in the palace. And the letters were dated to days when Aloan can be proven to have been elsewhere, witnessed by multiple servants. Silas's expression flickered. Just for a second. Furthermore, Alistair continued, I examined the false panel where the items were supposedly hidden. It was recently installed. The wood is fresh. The craftsmanship matches the style of a specific carpenter, one who works exclusively for members of the High Council. He let that hang in the air. Someone went to great lengths to frame Eloan Vane, Alistair said. Someone with resources. Someone with access. Someone who wanted her gone and was willing to fabricate evidence to make it happen. His gaze locked onto Silas. Someone like you, Elder Silas. The chamber exploded into chaos. Silas rose, his face a mask of rage. This is absurd. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Am I? Alistair's voice was deadly quiet. Then explain why the rogue leader Eloan supposedly conspired with was found dead 3 days ago. Convenient, isn't it? The one witness who could have disputed these letters is now unable to speak. Silas paled. Explain why your personal seal was found in the carpenter's workshop, Alistair continued. Explain why gold from your estate was used to pay the guards who discovered the evidence. Explain why you've been meeting in secret with council members who want me overthrown. You have no proof. I have plenty of proof, Alistair snarled. And more arriving by the hour. Did you really think I'd let you destroy the woman I love without a fight? The admission rang through the chamber like a bell. Silas's smile was sharp. Vicious. There it is. The truth. You're compromised, Your Majesty. You've let an Omega seduce you into betraying your own kingdom. I'm betraying nothing, Alistair said. I'm upholding the law. Real law. Not the corrupted version you've been hiding behind. He turned to the other council members. Elder Silas has committed treason. He has fabricated evidence. He has murdered a witness. And he has conspired to overthrow the crown. The penalty for these crimes is death. Silas laughed. Bitter and cold. You think you can execute me? Half this council supports me. Half this kingdom believes you're too weak to rule. Then let them try to stop me, Alistair said. He drew his sword. The chamber went silent. Silas's eyes widened. You wouldn't dare. I am the Alpha King, Alistair said, his voice echoing with ancient power. And you have betrayed not just the crown, but every wolf in this kingdom. You will answer for that. Silas shifted. Not into his human form. Into his wolf. Massive. Silver. Scarred from 100 battles. He lunged. Alistair met him midair, his own shift instantaneous. Black fur. Winter gray eyes. A wolf built for war. They collided in the center of the chamber, teeth and claws and fury. The crowd scattered, pressing against the walls. Eloan's chains rattled as she tried to move, tried to help, but she was trapped. The fight was brutal. Silas was older. More experienced. He fought dirty, going for Alistair's throat, his legs, anywhere that would cripple. But Alistair was faster, stronger, and fueled by something more powerful than hate. Love. He fought like a wolf with everything to lose. Every strike was precise. Every dodge calculated. And when Silas left an opening, just for a second, Alistair took it. His jaws closed around Silas's throat. The chamber held its breath. Alistair could have killed him. Should have killed him. Instead, he threw Silas across the floor, shifting back into his human form. Blood dripped from his mouth. His shirt was torn, but his eyes were clear. You don't deserve a warrior's death, Alistair said coldly. You'll face trial. Real trial. And when you're found guilty, you'll be exiled. Stripped of your title. Your name. Your legacy. You'll die alone and forgotten. That's justice. Silas lay on the floor, gasping, defeated. Alistair turned to the council. Does anyone else want to challenge my ruling? Silence. He crossed to Eloan, drawing another key from his pocket. Unlocked her chains. They fell to the floor with a clang that echoed through the chamber. Eloan Vane is innocent, Alistair declared. And anyone who questions that can challenge me directly. No one moved. Eloan stared at him, tears streaming down her face. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He'd chosen her. Alistair pulled her into his arms, right there in front of everyone, and held her like she was the only thing keeping him alive. I've got you, he whispered. You're safe. I've got you. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Eloin let herself believe it. 6 months later, the gardens bloomed. Not just the royal gardens with their carefully manicured roses and sculpted hedges, but the wild garden. The one Eloin and Alistair had claimed as theirs. The alcove beneath the willow tree where moonflowers now grew in impossible abundance, their white petals opening each night like stars falling to earth. Eloin stood among them, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, and watched the sun set over the kingdom that had tried to kill her. So much had changed. The Ironwood Medical Sanctuary had opened to lines that stretched around 3 city blocks. Wolves who'd been hiding in shadows for years finally had somewhere safe to go. Somewhere they'd be seen, helped, valued. The laws had changed too. Alistair had pushed them through despite council resistance. Omegas could now hold positions in government, in the guard, in places that had been closed to them for centuries. It wasn't perfect. There was still prejudice, still resistance, still wolves who looked at Eloin and saw only the Omega who'd seduced their king. But it was a start. Silas had been exiled, just as Alistair promised. Stripped of his title, his wealth, his name. The last anyone heard, he'd been wandering the neutral territories, a ghost of the wolf who'd once wielded so much power. Some of his supporters had followed him into exile. Others had bent the knee, recognizing that the world was changing whether they liked it or not. And Eloin. Eloin had become something she'd never expected. A queen. Not just in title, though she wore the crown now at formal events, but in the way the people saw her. The rogues who came to the sanctuary and told stories about the Omega Queen who'd stood trial and survived. The children who drew pictures of her and left them at the palace gates. The she-wolves who whispered that if she could rise from nothing, maybe they could too. She'd become a symbol. And it terrified her as much as it empowered her. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind her. Eloin didn't turn. She knew those footsteps. Had memorized the rhythm of them. The weight. Alistair. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands settling over hers on her belly. His chin rested on her shoulder, and she felt him exhale, a long, slow breath like he'd been holding it all day. Rough council meeting, she asked quietly. They want to reinstate the old marriage laws, he said. The ones that prohibited cross-rank unions. Eloin's jaw tightened. Of course they do. I told them no. They'll fight you. Let them. His arms tightened around her. I've fought bigger battles. She turned in his embrace, looking up at him. 6 months, and she still wasn't used to the way he looked at her. Like she was something precious. Miraculous. Worth burning down kingdoms for. You look tired, she said, reaching up to touch his face. I am tired. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. But I'm happy. Which is more than I ever thought I'd be. Even with all the fighting, all the resistance. Especially because of it. His gray eyes held hers. Because it means we're changing things. Really changing them. And yes, it's hard. Yes, there are days I want to throw the crown in the river and run away with you. But then I see what we've built. He gestured to the gardens, to the palace beyond, to the city sprawling in the distance. This matters, he said. We matter. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Eloin's throat tightened. Even on the days I'm impossible to live with? Especially on those days. His smile was soft. Real. You keep me honest. Keep me human. Without you, I'd be exactly what Silas wanted, a king with a crown and nothing else. She pulled him down and kissed him. Slow. Deep. A kiss that tasted like moonflowers and promise and the future they were building together, brick by impossible brick. When they broke apart, Alistair rested his forehead against hers. Our daughter is going to be extraordinary, he whispered. Or our son. Either way. His hand moved over her belly, gentle and reverent. They'll grow up in a kingdom that's better than the one we inherited. Where Omegas can be queens. Where rogues can be citizens. where love matters more than rank. You sound like you're writing a speech. Maybe I am. He grinned. Think the council will approve? The council can go to hell. That's my queen. They stood there as darkness fell, wrapped around each other beneath the willow tree, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in defiance of every rule that said they shouldn't. And Aloan thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago. The one who'd walked into a drawing room covered in mud and told a king he was heartless. The one who'd been so sure she'd die alone and forgotten. That girl would never have believed this ending. But here she was. Alive. Loved. Fighting for a kingdom that had tried to destroy her. And winning. Not because she was special. Not because she had power or status or any of the things society said mattered. But because she'd refused to be invisible. She'd demanded to be seen. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found someone willing to see her. Somewhere in the palace, a clock chimed midnight. In the sanctuary, a young Omega girl, no more than 15, scared and alone, pushed open the doors and found warmth and medicine and wolves who didn't turn her away. In the city, a rogue mother tucked her children into bed and told them stories about the Omega Queen who'd changed the laws, who'd made it possible for them to exist without fear. And in the council chamber, an old law was struck from the books. One more barrier removed. One more step towards something better. The work wasn't done. It would never be done. But it was happening. Change. Real change. The kind that started with one girl refusing to bow and one king choosing love over duty. The kind that rippled outward until it touched everything. But the story doesn't end there. Because late that night, after Alistair had fallen asleep beside her, Aloan stood on her balcony and looked out over the kingdom. And she wondered. She wondered about the girls in distant packs who were still being sold like cattle. About the rogues who hadn't heard about the sanctuary. About the wolves who still believed that Omegas were worthless and kings were untouchable. She wondered how many more battles they'd have to fight. How many more wolves would have to stand up and demand to be seen before the world finally listened. And she wondered, in the quiet darkness where doubts lived, if she was strong enough to keep going. If they were strong enough. Because the truth was, loving a king didn't make you safe. It made you a target. And every day, she woke up knowing that somewhere, someone like Silas was watching. Waiting. Planning. Looking for the moment to strike and tear down everything they'd built. Some days, that knowledge was suffocating. But other days like today, when the moonflowers bloomed and the sanctuary overflowed and the laws changed one by one. Other days, it felt like hope. Dangerous, fragile, impossible hope. The kind worth fighting for. The kind worth dying for. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of life growing inside her. "We'll make it better for you," she whispered to the child she hadn't met yet. "Your father and I. We'll fight every day to make this kingdom worthy of you." A promise. A vow. A challenge to the future. Would you have chosen her? Would you have stood in that council chamber and declared your love in front of wolves who wanted you dead? Would you have fought for someone society said was beneath you? Or would you have chosen the crown? The safety? The easy path? The truth is, most of us will never face a choice that's stark. Most of us won't have to choose between duty and love in front of a kingdom. But we make smaller choices every day. We choose whether to see the people society tells us to ignore. We choose whether to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. We choose whether to demand change or accept the world as it is. Aloan didn't start as a hero. She started as a girl covered in mud who couldn't keep her mouth shut. A girl who saw injustice and couldn't look away. And Alistair didn't start as a romantic. He started as a king so buried under duty, he'd forgotten what it meant to be human. They were just two broken people who chose each other. Who chose to fight. Who chose to believe that love could be stronger than law and compassion could be more powerful than claws. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the most powerful magic isn't in bloodlines or prophecies or ancient curses. Maybe it's in the choice to stand up. To speak out. To refuse to be invisible. Maybe it's in the decision to love someone even when the world says you shouldn't. So here's the real question. Is Aloan a hero? Or is she just a girl who refused to die quietly? Is Alistair a king worth following? Or is he just a man who finally found something worth fighting for? And does it matter? Because at the end of the day, they changed the world. Not because they were perfect. Not because they had all the answers. But because they tried. And sometimes, trying is enough. If this story lit something inside you, if you felt Aloan's fear and Alistair's devotion and the impossible hope of two wolves fighting against a world determined to keep them apart, then you understand what we do here. Here at Cindy's Wolfheart Stories, we don't tell tales about perfect heroes and easy victories. We tell stories about the girls who refuse to stay quiet. About the wolves who choose love when duty demands otherwise. About the fight to be seen in a world that wants you invisible. These are stories that burn. Stories that ache. Stories that remind you that, even in darkness, flowers can bloom. So if you're still here, if you're still thinking about Aloan standing in that council chamber, or Alistair dropping to his knees in the garden, or the moonflowers that shouldn't have survived, but did anyway, subscribe. Because this story isn't over. And there are more stories like it. More girls who refuse to bow. More kings who learn to love. More battles fought in garden alcoves and council chambers and the quiet spaces where change begins. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because here, we tell tales that burn. And once they catch fire, they never go out.